The ranking ceremony in New Acre lasted exactly as long as the system needed to tell the truth. For most, 3 minutes, sometimes 4. In rare cases, when the Grand Shaft discovered something exceptional, up to 8. Kai Morn stood on the platform for 12 minutes and 23 seconds. He was counting. It was a habit, turning waiting into data, because data left no room for panic. Around the platform stood roughly 400 people by his estimate. Families of the other candidates, official observers in gray robes with gold trim, 2 military officials by the left exit. They'd appeared at the 8-minute mark, once it became clear something was wrong. He noted their arrival without particular interest. Military presence was rare. It usually meant either SS rank and above, or something for which the system had no good word. The evaluation column stood at the center of the hall. Marble quarried from the lower shafts, the kind that glowed faintly on its own in the dark. Right now, it glowed differently. Not white, not yellow, not any of the 10 standard colors on the rank scale. It glowed a color Kai found difficult to name. Somewhere between ash and what you see in the second before a fire goes out. The system logged this color in its registries under the code Archive Gray. In the entire history of New Acre, that color had appeared 3 times. 2 of the 3 previous bearers were dead within the first day after the ceremony. The third had disappeared into the abyss in the 3rd year following the drop and never surfaced again. Kai didn't know this. He'd find out later. In this moment, he simply stood, counted seconds, and watched the face of the chief evaluator, an older man named Vort Assen, whose eyebrows, Kai noticed, had risen at the 4-minute mark and not come back down. "The system registers a non-standard result," the voice from the crystal transmission sphere above the column finally announced. The system's voice was always the same. Neither male nor female, neither warm nor cold, simply precise. Candidate Kai Morn, rank indeterminate, class unclassifiable, ability type archival, protocol in effect 9. A pause. "What's an archival type?" asked a woman in the front row. Frightened voice. One of the other candidates' mothers. Vort Assen didn't answer her. He was looking at Kai. "Protocol 9, he repeated quietly. Not for the hall, for himself. Then, louder. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. The ceremony will continue shortly." 3 guards in dark blue uniforms stepped through the side doors. 2 took positions behind Kai. The 3rd moved to cover the main exit. Kai looked at the guards, then at Vort Assen, then at the column, still glowing with its ashen light, as though the system hadn't finished saying something. "Last words?" one of the guards asked. Routine. The way you ask someone if they want salt on their food. "Yes," said Kai. The guard looked mildly surprised. Most people apparently didn't answer the question. "How many people have survived the abyss after Protocol 9? Vort Assen, who had heard the question, answered instead of the guard. His voice was professionally neutral, but something was there. Kai didn't find the word immediately. Then he found it. Exhaustion. The old evaluator was tired of his work, precisely enough to answer honestly. 2. In 180 years. "Understood," said Kai. "Thank you." The trapdoor in the floor opened. Kai fell. The abyss began where light ended. Not metaphorically, literally, at 40 meters below the surface, where the scattered glow of the shaft lanterns still barely reached, there existed an invisible boundary. Beyond it, the darkness was different. Not simply the absence of light, but the presence of something else. Something that occupied the space that light would occupy in a normal world. Kai landed badly. That's understating it. 40 meters of freefall. No magical cushion. Protocol 9 specifically included a nullifying bracelet on the wrist that blocked any active abilities within his own body radius for the first 12 hours, to prevent any temptation to use what the system had deemed unclassifiable. He hit the stone floor on his right side, heard something crack. Ribs, one or two, got thrown into the wall. His head struck the stone. Not hard, but enough for the world to go blurry for a few seconds. He lay in the dark and breathed. Breathing hurt. Every inhale answered in his right side with a sharp, precise complaint. He methodically checked his limbs. Left arm, working. Right arm, working. Legs, both working. Spine, presumably intact, otherwise he'd have already understood that. Head, functional, though with a delay. He sat up, in total darkness. His supplies: 1 light crystal, good for 8 hours, 3 days of rations, minimum, standard for Protocol 9, the clothes on him, the nullifying bracelet on his wrist. No weapons, no map, no tools. He activated the light crystal. Greenish light expanded roughly 3 meters in every direction. Beyond that, darkness. Kai looked around. He was in a tunnel. Roughly cut stone, tool marks on the walls. Very old, nearly smoothed by time. Ceiling height about 5 meters. Width, 4 meters or so. The tunnel extended in both directions, left and right. No sign, no obvious criterion for choosing. He chose left. Reason: the left wall was slightly lighter, which could indicate mineral inclusions that reflected light, meaning older, more settled stone. That might mean nothing, but it was something. He walked roughly 200 meters before he heard the sound. Not breathing. Not footsteps. Something like small tapping, rhythmic, almost mechanical, as though something very small and very persistent was chipping at stone. Kai stopped. He knew about the abyss exactly what a person who'd read the official documentation knew, which was nothing useful. The official documents described the abyss in terms of threat and necessary isolation. They didn't describe what first-tier creatures looked like, how they attacked, what their weak points were. He moved forward, because there was no other option. What he found around the corner was about the size of a cat, and looked roughly like what a beetle would look like if beetles grew to the size of cats and had carapaces made of something resembling obsidian. It was chipping at the wall with precise strikes of its front legs, each impact dislodging a tiny fragment of stone. The creature was collecting these fragments into a small pile. Kai watched this for a few seconds. The creature turned. Its eyes, 8 of them, arranged in a ring around its head, each the size of a coin. All 8 fixed on Kai with an expression that could be interpreted as, "You shouldn't be here." It lunged. Kai didn't make it. Didn't step back, didn't block, didn't even correctly estimate the speed. The creature covered 3 meters faster than he'd processed its intention, and its front leg, with claws of the same obsidian material as the carapace, swept his left arm from elbow to wrist. The pain was total. Not sharp, not dull, simply complete, occupying every available space in his perception. He fell. The creature stood over him. He watched it raise its leg for a second strike, aiming for the throat. Well, thought Kai, with that particular clarity that sometimes arrives at the worst possible moment, at least it'll be quick. The strike landed exactly. Dying turned out not to be what he'd expected. Not darkness, not silence. Something else. Kai stood in a space without walls, floor, or ceiling. Only even gray light, uniform from all sides, as if the air itself were faintly luminous. The quiet was the kind that exists only in completely dead places. And then text appeared. Not in the air, not before his eyes, directly in his mind, like a memory that hadn't existed a moment before. Death System. First Initialization. Host, Kai Morn. Classification, Archival Class / Death Copier. Status, First Revival. Witch complete. Function. The death system copies and integrates data from every lethal event the host experiences. Death is not an end. Death is instruction. Operating principle. Each death is analyzed. Cause, mechanism, creature, or phenomenon that dealt lethal damage. From the analysis, a death blueprint is extracted, a complete structural map of the threat. The host revives with the integrated blueprint, partial immunity to the cause of death, enhancement of relevant characteristics, sometimes a new passive ability. First death, Obsidian Reaper, Abyss Tier 1. Cause of lethal damage, severed carotid artery. Integrated data. Reaction speed, increased by 34%. Resistance to slashing damage, plus 12%, passive. New passive ability, Strike Read. The system highlights the point of first contact 0.3 seconds before an opponent's physical attack. Current death count, 1. Current revival count, 1. System note: the host cannot die permanently. The system does not, however, guarantee that dying will be pleasant. Kai read this twice, then once more, slowly, word by word. Then thought, so that's what archival class means. The system hadn't given him a rank. No combat class, no defensive class, no support class. It had given him something else. Something the Grand Shaft couldn't classify, because it had no category for an ability that grows stronger through exactly the thing that's supposed to destroy it. He died, and got better. Not better in an abstract sense. Concretely, measurably. Each death was data. Each revival was integrated data plus changes in his body that made the next encounter with the same threat less lethal. Theoretically. Kai looked up, metaphorically, since in the gray space there was no up or down, and thought about the practical side of things. To accumulate data through deaths, you had to die. Regularly. Ideally from different things, so the range of integrated blueprints would be as wide as possible. But each death would still be a death, with everything that physically implies. He remembered the leg sweeping across his arm. Yes, he thought. This is going to be unpleasant. The gray light began to change. Not fading, more like gathering, condensing into a single point that grew brighter and brighter, until Kai opened his eyes. He was lying on the same stone floor, the same tunnel. The same greenish glow from the crystal, which somehow hadn't shattered during his fall. His left arm was whole, no cut, no pain. Only fresh skin, a few shades lighter than the skin around it, as if it had just grown back. The Obsidian Reaper was gone. Kai sat up and looked around. The creature had disappeared, or retreated, having received what it wanted, what it probably thought was his death. He stood up, picked up the light crystal, turned his left arm palm up, and slowly closed his fist. Then opened it. Then made a quick movement, sharp, the kind he wouldn't have done before without thinking about it. Too fast, too precise. The arm responded without delay, without hesitation. 34% reaction speed increase, he thought. Interesting how that will feel in an actual fight. He looked in the direction the Reaper had come from, then in the opposite direction, then made a decision that any reasonable person would have called madness. He went looking for the Reaper again. He found it 100 meters away. The creature had returned to its wall and was chipping away again. The small pile of fragments had grown slightly. Kai stopped 5 meters away and watched. First observation: the Reaper isn't naturally aggressive. It reacts to approach. Reaction boundary, roughly 3 meters. Second observation: before lunging, the creature shifts its weight slightly to its back legs. A fraction of a second. Kai hadn't noticed that before. He noticed it now because the system had highlighted the contact point 0.3 seconds before the attack. Third observation: the Reaper only has a carapace on top. Underneath, soft tissue, dark gray, nearly blending with the carapace in the dark, but a different texture. He took a step forward, crossed the 3-meter boundary. The Reaper lunged. This time, Kai saw the contact point, a glowing marker hanging in the air where the leg would land. He shifted 20 centimeters to the right. The leg passed by. He dropped to one knee under the arc of the second strike, grabbed a stone from the floor, sharp, about 300 grams, and drove it upward into the soft tissue beneath the creature's belly. The stone didn't pierce the carapace, but it pierced the soft tissue. The Reaper made a sound, not a cry, more a sharp crack, like something collapsing under pressure, and fell. Kai straightened up. The creature lay on its side. Alive. He could see it breathing, but immobilized. He watched it for 10 seconds, then picked up a heavier stone and finished the job. It was unpleasant. Not morally, physically. Killing a creature with an obsidian carapace using a bare stone turned out to be considerably harder than expected. It took him about 3 minutes and left him covered in sweat and small cuts from the shards. But when it was done, he sat beside the dead Reaper and began to study it. Professionally, methodically. Front legs, 3 claws of dense chitin coated in something resembling obsidian. Sharpness exceptional. Impact force sufficient to tear tissue in a single contact. Back legs, 4, thicker, clearly designed for jumping. Jump range, 3 meters from standing. Carapace, warm to the touch. Not obsidian, something organic that generates heat. Soft underside tissue, vulnerable. A sharp enough tool with moderate pressure would do it. He committed everything to memory, then stood, picked up the sharpest carapace fragment he could find near the body, and continued on. He had a weapon now. Small, awkward, but a weapon. By the end of the first day, he died twice more. The second time, he fell into a hidden shaft he hadn't seen in the dark. Dropped about 8 meters, broke both legs, and died of shock a few minutes later. The gray space received him again. Second death, fall from 8 meters. Cause of lethal damage, hemorrhagic shock from multiple fractures. Integrated data. Bone density increased by 18%. Pain threshold, elevated, passive. New passive ability, terrain map. The system automatically scans the surface up to 5 meters ahead of the host and marks unstable sections. Note, the host fell into the same type of trap twice in one day. The system recommends paying more attention to what is underfoot. Current death count, 2. Kai read the system's note and thought that the system seemed to have a sense of humor, or something like one. The third death came toward evening, 6 hours after the second revival. He stumbled into a swarm of creatures he mentally named tunnel moths, palm-sized, flying silently, their only attack being to land on a target and secrete acid from their legs. 1 at a time, trivial. 30 at once, incompatible with continued existence. He died in 40 seconds. Third death. Chemical burn covering 94% of body surface. Cause of lethal damage? Acid dissolution of vital organs. Integrated data. Chemical damage resistance, plus 41%, passive. Skin regeneration, activated, passive, limited area. New passive ability, chemical analysis. System identifies the composition of substances secreted by creatures on visual contact. Current death count? 3. System note. Blueprint accumulation rate exceeds projections. Host demonstrates an atypical tendency to study the environment before each lethal event. This is non-standard. Non-standard. Kai lay in the dark after the third revival and turned that word over. The system considered it non-standard that he studied creatures before dying, which meant most archival class hosts, if they existed at all, simply died. Randomly. Chaotically. Collecting blueprints from deaths they hadn't planned. He was planning. That was the difference. Not between survival and death. He had no illusions about his current combat capability. But the difference between blind data accumulation and systematic data accumulation. He stood up, checked the crystal, about 4 more hours of charge, and started thinking about what to do next. 3 deaths in 1 day. 3 blueprints. Already he was considerably faster, denser, more resistant to chemical damage than any unranked person. But significantly better than no rank still meant significantly worse than D rank. He needed a base. Not abstractly, concretely. A place to rest between deaths, where he could study blueprints without the pressure of an immediate threat, where he could think. The Abyss killed random people because random people moved randomly. They slept wherever exhaustion found them. They didn't build, didn't fortify, didn't create structure. He was archival class, a death copier. But beyond the death system, there was something else in him. Something he'd brought from his life before the ceremony. Before the Abyss. Before he became nothing from the Grand Shaft's perspective. Kai Morn had spent 3 years as a draftsman in New Acre's Municipal Infrastructure Department. He knew how to build. Not like a hero, like an engineer. He started looking for a suitable location. Chapter 2. The First Blueprint. He found it on the 3rd day. Not the 2nd. On the 2nd, he died 4 more times. Total, 7 deaths, 7 blueprints. And spent most of that time in what might be called an actively dying state, if not for the system returning him each time. Each death added something. The 4th, from the bite of a creature with paralytic venom, gave him partial immunity to neurotoxins and a new ability, Poison Map, letting him see toxic substances in the air as a faint blue glow. The 5th, from a cave-in, he'd gone somewhere he shouldn't have, gave him reinforced chest structure and the ability Seismic Hearing. He could now detect vibrations in stone within 15 meters. The 6th, from a creature he hadn't managed to get a look at before it struck him from behind, gave him enhanced peripheral vision and heightened sensitivity to movement at his back. The 7th, the most unpleasant, from a long, eel-like creature that simply squeezed until his ribs collapsed inward, gave him a significant increase in bone density and the ability pressure reading. He now instinctively assessed loads on structures, useful for an engineer in an unstable underground environment. By the end of the second day, he moved differently. Not faster than any trained person, not yet, but with a different quality of movement, as if his body had begun to understand the space around it, not through vision alone, but through something more subtle, vibrations, scents, temperature shifts that he hadn't noticed before. On the third day, he found the place, a natural widening of the tunnel, not cut by tools, roughly 8 by 6 meters, ceiling about 3.5 meters, 2 entrances, one wide, 2 people side by side, one narrow, sideways only. Walls of different stone, denser with quartz inclusions. Floor uneven but broadly horizontal. Kai spent 40 minutes studying the space, then sat in the center and started drawing, with his finger in the dusty floor. Wide entrance, needs defense. Not a door, he had no material for a door, but a narrowing. If he chipped the right stones from the walls and used them to block part of the entrance, he'd have a passage about 1.20 meters wide, enough for one person, too narrow for most of the first-tier creatures he'd encountered. Narrow entrance, leave it as is, emergency exit. The creatures he'd died to were mostly too large for it. Ceiling. One section unstable. The seismic hearing system had flagged this. He needed to either reinforce it, with what? Or make it a controlled collapse, a trap. He spent an hour thinking about this, then stood and started working. No tools, but he had hands, stone, strength, more than a week ago after 7 deaths, and 3 years of experience working with structures. He worked until the crystal began to fade, then slept in a corner, choosing a position invisible from either entrance. The next morning, he tracked time by hunger and fatigue, not by clocks. He continued. By the end of the 4th day, he had an entrance 1.20 meters wide with sharp Reaper carapace fragments embedded in the upper edge. The idea came during the 5th death, when he recalled how sharp those fragments were. The unstable ceiling section near the wide entrance was propped by a single support of 3 stacked stones. Remove the middle one and the section would come down. This wasn't a fortress, it was a fortified burrow, but a burrow with teeth. He named it Point 1 and logged its coordinates in memory, its position relative to the drop point and both entrances. Then sat down, took out his rations, a day and a half remaining, and started planning. The first visitor came on the 5th day. Not a creature, a person. More accurately, what was left of a person after several weeks in the abyss without system support. A woman around 30, moving along the tunnel wall with that particular careful step you develop when the ground has repeatedly been somewhere other than you expected. Clothes torn. On her left forearm, an old burn, improperly healed. Her eyes had that quality of attention that means either highly developed survival instinct or very strong fear, or both simultaneously. She stopped at the wide entrance to his burrow, saw the narrowing, saw the fragments, saw Kai sitting inside. A long pause. "You built this?" she said. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." She looked at the narrowing, then at him, then back at the narrowing. "How long have you been on Tier 1? "About a week." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "A week? And you're alive?" "More or less." That was the technically accurate answer. 8 deaths at this point. The 8th had happened at night, when something quiet and without visible sense organs had reached him while he slept. That had been unpleasant. It had given him tactile field perception. He could now sense the presence of living creatures within 8 meters through faint vibrations in the air. "I'm Erna Vecht," the woman said. "Former C-rank, builder class. Protocol 7. 2 months in the abyss." Kai looked at her with a somewhat different interest. Builder class. The system had a builder class, one of the rarest because it provided no direct combat power and was considered useless in individual application. Builders created structures, reinforced materials, sensed structural loads, could work magical properties into physical objects given suitable resources. In a team, irreplaceable. Alone, in the abyss, without resources, theoretically useless. But 2 months. That meant she'd found a way to survive 2 months without a combat ability. That in itself was data worth acquiring. "Kai Morn," he said. "No rank assigned. Archival class." Archival? She clearly didn't know what that meant. "I get better when I die." A pause. "That explains how you're alive a week in with no rank," she said slowly. "Partially." She looked at his burrow for another second, then made a decision. Kai could see exactly how it happened. A brief closing in the eyes when analysis ends and action begins. "I need a roof over my head for the night," she said. "In exchange, I'll tell you everything I know about Tiers 1 and 2. 3 nights, said Kai, in exchange for knowledge and help with construction. You're builder class. I need you for expanding this space." Silence. "You want to expand this?" she said. Not with doubt, with professional interest. "I want to build a permanent base here," said Kai, "large enough to withstand the threats of Tier 2. Erna Vecht looked at the walls, at the ceiling, at the floor, at the narrowed entrance, at the 3-stone support. Then she said, "The support is wrong. The middle stone carries too little load. When the ceiling comes down, it will go first, but at the wrong angle. You need a wedge lock." "Show me." She stepped inside. The next 3 days were the most productive Kai had spent in the abyss. Erna knew things that weren't in the official documents. She'd spent 2 months observing, recording, surviving through understanding rather than strength, because she had no strength. She knew that tunnel moths didn't fly in the presence of certain mineral vapors. She'd found a vein of the right mineral 300 meters from point 1. She knew that obsidian reapers were territorial. Their claimed territory was marked by microscopic scratches on the walls, and if you didn't cross that boundary, they wouldn't attack. She knew there was an underground stream with drinking water half a kilometer to the north. For Kai, this was treasure. Not because it improved his ability to die. His ability to die was improving on its own. Because it improved his ability not to die randomly. And a random death, one without prior study of the threat, produced a significantly lower quality blueprint than an intentional one. He told her about the death system. Not immediately. On the second day, when she realized he'd intentionally walked into the tunnel moth swarm knowing they would kill him. "You're seeking death," she said. Not an accusation, a statement of fact. "I'm seeking data," he corrected. "Death is a tool." She looked at him for a second. Then, "How many times have you died?" 11. "In a week?" "In 8 days." Silence. "And each time you get stronger?" "Not stronger. More specific." He raised his left arm. "I'm resistant to chemical damage, slashing damage, vibrational bone stress. I hear stone. I feel air movement. I see poisons. My reflexes are faster than most D-rank fighters." A pause. "But I have no active abilities. No magic. No damage output. Only passive adaptations and a better understanding of what's trying to kill me. Erna was quiet. That, she said at last, is either a very good plan or a very bad one. Usually both at once, he agreed. She almost smiled. Almost. All right, she said. Tell me what you want to build. By the end of their first week working together, Point 1 had ceased to be a burrow. It had become a small but structurally sound base. Expanded central chamber, 12 by 8 meters. Ceiling raised and reinforced by Erna. Her builder class allowed her to hear loads in stone and precisely reinforce critical sections by touch, feeding a small amount of magical energy into the structure. 3 zones: working, table of flat stones; sleeping, 2 positions shielded from direct sightlines from either entrance; storage. 2 entrances, both now narrowed. The wide one, with a rapid block system, 3 stones that could be dropped into a slot in seconds. The narrow one, with an acid trap, a clay pot of tunnel moth secretion hung above the entrance on a cord of reaper tendons. Supplies: water from the underground stream. Erna found a way to filter it through a layer of particular mineral. Fungi from the lower sections of tunnels. She identified edible varieties on her first day. A supply of light crystals. They'd found a small vein in the western tunnel. Uncharged, but Erna could charge them with her ability. Tools: collected obsidian shards from killed reapers, sharpened into crude cutting instruments. 1 long stone that served as a lever. Several clay pots. Kai found the right type of ore. Erna knew how to fire it in cracks with geothermal heat. It was not much. It was almost nothing compared to what he needed for working the lower tiers. But it was a beginning. Kai sat in the center of the base at the end of the 12th day and studied the walls. Then opened his internal system, what he'd begun calling the blueprint registry, and reviewed what had accumulated. 11 deaths, 11 blueprints, each one a specific adaptation to a specific threat. Together, they form something with no equivalent in the standard rank classification. A body that knew the abyss from the inside, not through study, through the abyss's own experience. He thought about the official documents he'd read before the ceremony. They said that survivors of the abyss, those few who survived at all, did so through strength. High-ranked fighters dropped for various reasons, sometimes made it back to the surface after years. Their survival was attributed to combat power that allowed direct handling of threats. He was surviving differently, not through strength, through understanding. Each death added not power, but knowledge. Knowledge of a specific threat type, embedded in the body as adaptation. The base provided time to process that knowledge between deaths. Erna provided context, environmental understanding that he'd have taken considerably longer to accumulate alone. He thought about what this meant long-term. Tier 1. Already mostly comprehensible. Threats known, patterns studied, adaptations to most of them acquired. Tier 2. Considerably harder. Down there, by Erna's account, the creatures were larger, smarter. Some had basic magical abilities. Going there now meant dying fast and chaotically, without opportunity to study. Preparation was needed. A more serious base was needed. And he needed to understand what was actually on Tier 2 before going there. "Erna!" he called. She looked up from the stone she was shaping into a table corner. "What do you know about the passage to Tier 2? Chapter 3. The Price of Data. Erna knew the following about the passage to Tier 2. It existed in 3 locations she was aware of within reach of Point 1. 2 were open shafts leading straight down. 1 was an inclined tunnel, shallower and theoretically more manageable. She also knew that 2 months ago she'd tried going through the inclined tunnel and had run back out 20 minutes later upon seeing what met her there. "What exactly?" Kai asked. "It's called the Deep Broodmother," said Erna. "A colonial creature, largely immobile, occupies most of the tunnel. Generates workers, small, fast, with acid mandibles. There were about 50 when I saw it, maybe more." Kai processed this. "Does it guard the passage?" "It lives in the passage. The workers are its senses and defense. Kill one, it sends 10 more." "And the broodmother itself?" Erna looked at him with the expression Kai had started reading as, "Are you serious?" "Its carapace withstands strikes from B-rank fighters," she said. "I watched someone try once. It didn't end well." "Good," said Kai. "Good? That means I need to die to it enough times to accumulate a blueprint suitable for passage." A long silence. "You're going to intentionally die to the Deep Broodmother?" Erna said. "Systematically," he specified. "That's..." She stopped, started again. "How many deaths do you need?" "I don't know. The first death will give a baseline blueprint. Then I'll need to analyze what I got and determine what data is still missing. Probably several, maybe many." Erna looked at him. "Does dying to the broodmother hurt?" "Most likely very much." "And you know that, and you're going anyway." "I have no other way to reach Tier 2, said Kai. "I can't get through by force. So, by knowledge." And knowledge here costs death. She was quiet for another second, then said, "I'll come with you to the edge." "Why?" "To observe." She held up her notebook, several sheets of a particular fungal bark she'd found in the first weeks. "You die and revive. I don't die and don't revive, which means I can observe things you can't. What's happening outside while you're dying inside." That was a reasonable point. Kai didn't dismiss it. "All right, tomorrow." The first encounter with the Deep Broodmother happened the next morning. Kai saw it from 100 meters into the inclined tunnel, a mass of living tissue occupying roughly 2/3 of the passage width, dark crimson, faintly pulsing. The smell, chemical, sharp, slightly reminiscent of an oxidizer. Around it moved workers, small 6 to 8 centimeter creatures with transparent mandibles that glowed faintly green. He stood at 100 meters and watched. Erna stood beside him, held the notebook. "Do the workers respond to movement or sound?" he asked quietly. "Smell," said Erna. "I've tested it. If you move very slowly and you're sheltered from the cross-draft, they don't notice you." "So they have no vision?" "The broodmother does. The workers don't." Important detail. Kai logged it. "How many workers right now?" "I counted 32. Last time there were over 50, but then it was sensing a threat. Right now it's calm." Kai watched for another minute. "I'm going in." "Kai?" "Yes?" "Come back to this spot, every time. I'll be here." He nodded and moved forward. The workers noticed him at 15 meters, by scent. The first 3 lunged immediately. He killed one with the obsidian shard and took acid on his hand from the second. The third came from behind and drove its mandibles into his neck. Died quickly. 12th death. Neurotoxic poisoning, introduced via bite from a Deep Broodmother worker organism. Cause of lethal damage? Respiratory center paralysis. Integrated data. Immunity to broodmother worker neurotoxin, 67%, passive. Pain signal processing speed, increased, allows longer function under active poisoning. New data on the broodmother. Visual organs located on the upper surface, oriented upward. Lower surface. Probable zone of minimal protection. Current death count, 12. He revived in the tunnel. The workers had dispersed, or decided the threat had been neutralized. He crawled back to where Erna was waiting. "What did you see?" he asked immediately. She showed him the notebook. A diagram of the workers' positions at the moment of attack. The broodmother's movement during the incident. It had turned slightly. The direction of the main airflow in the tunnel. "It turned left," said Erna, "when you appeared. So, it hears? Or senses floor vibration?" "Floor vibration," said Kai. "I hear vibrations through seismic hearing. It probably does too. Which means I need to move without lifting my feet." "Sliding?" "Or using a soft surface underfoot. If I can get under it." "The lower surface?" "Probable zone of minimal protection. Needs testing." Erna looked at him. "You're going again." "In 5 minutes. I want to let the workers settle." The second, third, and fourth deaths from the broodmother and its workers gave him the following. 13th death. Workers again, but he lasted considerably longer. Full immunity to broodmother worker neurotoxin, and a new ability, colony map. He could now sense the position of all workers within 20 meters through the faint vibrations of their movement. 14th death. He reached the broodmother itself and received what seemed to be a concentrated acid discharge. Partial immunity to colonial secretion, class acid, and data showing that the discharge required 3 seconds of preparation, a visible compression of the upper body portion. 15th death. First attempt to reach underneath. Failed. Workers intercepted. Data confirming that the broodmother's lower surface was indeed considerably softer than the upper, but without a penetrating weapon, it was useless. After the 15th death, he returned to Erna and they spent 2 hours developing a plan. Then another day, fabricating the tool. Erna knew how to work with materials. Not create from nothing, but improve what existed. 3 of the largest obsidian shards from killed reapers she joined into a structure resembling a short spear. 2 shards as side blades, one as the main point, bound with tendon strips and saturated with the resin of a particular fungus that hardened like bone. Her builder class allowed her to work a small amount of structural reinforcement into the construction. The spear held loads considerably better than bare stone should. On the 16th day, they went to the broodmother together. Kai, forward, toward the creature. Erna, behind, at the edge of visual range, with her notebook. He moved without lifting his feet from the floor, sliding along the stone, distributing weight as evenly as possible. The colony map showed 31 workers. He navigated around them, charting their positions on his internal map. Reached 5 meters from the broodmother. It reacted, turned, detecting vibration. Began preparing the discharge. 3 seconds. He broke left, clearing the acid stream zone, rolled under the creature's body, and drove the spear upward from below into the soft underside tissue. The broodmother made a sound he'd never heard before. High, resonant, almost mechanical. The workers reacted instantly, flooding in from all directions. Kai died. 16th death. Multiple worker organism bites, complete tissue necrosis. But data on the broodmother: lower tissue breached, internal structure logged. Critical node: central nerve ganglion, located 12 centimeters from the lower surface in the anterior third of the body. Integrated data: resistance to necrotizing agents, plus 55%, passive. New active ability, Death Anatomy. The host sees critical vulnerable points on creatures from which they have previously died, displayed as luminous markers. System note: host reached the critical node on the first attempt after 4 deaths against this target. This is statistically non-standard. Analysis of accumulated blueprints indicates formation of a tactical pattern exceeding simple adaptation. Current death count, 16. When he revived and read the last system note, he sat in the tunnel darkness for a long time. Death Anatomy. He could see vulnerable points now, critical nodes, on everything he died to. Not just knew, saw, as glowing markers on creatures' bodies. This changed everything. Kai stood, returned to Erna, and silently took the spear she'd been holding. It had survived. She'd picked it up. "Again?" she asked. "Last time." He returned to the broodmother, which by the vibrations hadn't fully calmed from the previous intrusion. The workers had increased, 42 by his sensing. The broodmother had clearly ramped up in response to the threat. He moved slower than before, reached 3 meters, saw the luminous marker, bright red, pulsing in the central anterior section of the lower surface. Central nerve ganglion. The broodmother sensed him again, began the discharge sequence. He lunged not left, forward, directly under the body, letting the discharge pass overhead. Found the marker by feel against the soft tissue below. It glowed, but not physically. This was inner vision. Drove the spear precisely into the marked point and pushed. The broodmother stopped. Didn't die immediately. A creature that size dies slowly. But it stopped. The workers lost coordination. Without the central ganglion, they scattered randomly. Kai extracted himself from under the body, moved to a safe distance, and waited. 4 minutes. Then, silence. The passage to Tier 2 was open. Chapter 4. Tier 2. They descended to Tier 2 together. Kai didn't suggest Erna stay behind. She didn't ask permission to come. A silent agreement that had formed over 2.5 weeks of shared survival. She went where he went, because her survival was tied to his base, and his base required her builder class. And because he didn't want to go alone, though he wouldn't have said that out loud. Tier 2 met them with different air. That was the first thing Kai felt. The smell had changed. Not worse or better, just different. Less mineral, more organic, warmer. He ran chemical analysis and got a picture that explained why the official documents said so little about the lower tiers. The air in Tier 2 contained components absent in Tier 1. Several of them were unfamiliar to the system. It flagged them as unclassified biological agents. "Masks," said Kai. Erna nodded and produced a construction of filter fungus and thin hide they'd made in advance. Not ideal, but something. The Tier 2 tunnel was wider, considerably, 5 or 6 meters across, ceiling at 7 or 8 meters. Walls, different stone, darker, with veins of something metallic glossy. "Magnetite," said Erna quietly, touching the wall. "Magnetic ore." A pause. "If there's a lot of magnetite here, it might explain some of the ability anomalies on the lower tiers." "Ore affects magic?" "It creates interference. Abilities requiring precise control work worse. Raw force abilities, barely affected." She pulled her hand from the wall. "Which means high-ranked fighters are less effective down here than on the surface." "And me?" "Your adaptations are biological, not magical. It won't affect you." Kai logged this. The first Tier 2 creatures appeared after 200 meters. They didn't attack immediately. They simply appeared, emerging from cracks in the walls. Creatures roughly a meter tall, bipedal, with elongated upper limbs and dark, chitinous skin. Not insects, closer to primates, if primates had developed in absolute darkness over several thousand years. They watched. Kai watched back. "Those are shades," Erna said quietly. "I read about them in one survivor's notes. Intelligent. Not at human level, but enough. They hunt in packs." Aggression is met with aggression. Passivity is met with waiting. So don't attack. So don't attack. They passed through. The shades watched, but didn't move. 500 meters in, Kai understood that Tier 2 was a different world. Not metaphorically, literally. The tunnel structure here was non-human. Not chaotic, ordered, but according to a different logic. They branched, merged, intersected at angles that looked wrong, but on closer inspection were functional. Something, or someone, had built here, long ago, with a specific purpose. Erna, was this built? She was touching the walls, listening through her class. Partially. Some tunnels are natural, some were expanded, some... She stopped. Some are aligned according to a principle I don't understand, but it's not chance. Who built it? I don't know, but a lot of it was built, and long ago. The stone has had time to recrystallize at the modified sections. Hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Kai studied the tunnel. The abyss wasn't simply a disposal site. It was a place with its own history, its own architecture. With creatures intelligent enough to build, and with those who had created something that had survived centuries. The first death on Tier 2 came unexpectedly. Not from a shade, from something he couldn't see at all. An invisible creature, detectable only through tactile field perception, as a faint disturbance in the air, struck him in the back with something sharp and disappeared before he could turn around. He died within a few minutes. 17th death. Penetrating strike to the occipital region. Cause, medulla oblongata damage. Creature, unidentified. Integrated data. Occipital bone density, significantly increased. New passive ability, Echo Shadow. Host senses invisible creatures through their thermal trace in the air at up to 10 meters. Partial data on unidentified creature. Uses thermal camouflage. Attacks solitary targets. Avoids groups of 2 or more. Current death count, 17. System note. Tier 2 data is considerably more complex than Tier 1 data. Projected deaths for full environmental adaptation, 40 to 80 additional lethal events. The host has probably already worked this out. Kai read the last line. Yes, he had. He revived beside Erna, who was standing completely still with her back against the wall, staring at a point in the air ahead of her, with an expression of extreme concentration. "It's gone," Kai said quietly. She exhaled. "I heard you fall," she said. "Then, nothing. 5 minutes." 17th death. He stood. "It avoids groups. You're safe as long as we're together." "That's not the most comforting thing." "No," he agreed. "Let's find a location for a base on this tier." Erna looked at him. "You want to build here?" "I want to build everywhere," said Kai. "It's the only way to go deeper without dying from the same thing over and over." They found the location for the second base after an hour of searching. Larger than Point 1, 20 by 15 meters, with an additional alcove in the western wall. Ceiling 4 meters even. One entrance, wide but with a natural S-shaped narrowing that made direct assault impossible. Magnetite veins in the walls. Erna touched them and said she could work with them. Magnetite creates magical interference, she said. But if you arrange the veins correctly, you can create a passive shield. Not against physical threats. Against magical detection. Creatures on Tier 2 that hunt through magical sight won't see us inside. That was valuable. How long do you need? 3 days if I work constantly, a week with sleep breaks. 3 days. I'll go study the tier. You'll go die? Systematically, he specified. The next 3 days, Kai methodically died to Tier 2 creatures. He did this not chaotically, with a plan. Each morning, he was tracking time by hunger and fatigue again, he identified one specific creature to study, observed it from safe distance using all available passive abilities, constructed a hypothesis about the most efficient lethal contact. It sounded paradoxical, but the logic was, dying fast while getting maximum data is better than dying slowly and chaotically. Then went and died. 18th death, Stone Troll, rank equivalent approximately B. A creature with armored skin that simply crushed physically. Gave him significant muscle fiber enhancement and the ability structural reading. He now instinctively assessed physical load on his body with each strike. 19th death, Ember Centipede. A creature that attacked with a simultaneous thermal discharge from all body segments. Gave partial immunity to heat damage and the ability Thermal Vision. He could see the heat signatures of living creatures within 20 meters in the dark. 20th death, the invisible creature again. He'd intentionally found it through Echo Shadow. This time he survived long enough to see it at the moment of attack. Thin, long, needle-like. Gave him a complete description of the creature he named Needler, and the ability Active Thermal Camouflage Countermeasure. He could now temporarily reduce his own heat signature to 0, making him invisible to the Needler the same way the Needler was invisible to him. By the end of the 3rd day, Kai returned to base. Erna was finishing her work on the magnetite veins. The chamber had changed. A faintly detectable vibration had appeared in the walls, perceptible only through his seismic hearing, as if the stone was weakly singing on a frequency inaccessible to ordinary ears. "Done," she said. "Magical shield is active. Any creature using magical detection won't see us inside." Good. Kai sat down. Now we need to talk about the next step. Tier 3. Tier 3. Erna looked at him. "You've died 20 times. 21, he corrected. There was another one while you were sleeping. Fire vein in the tunnel wall. Didn't see it. Touched it. 21 times. She looked at him with an expression he didn't classify immediately. Then did. Not fear, not sympathy, something like analytical respect. "You are the strangest creature I've encountered in the abyss." That comparison is with abyss creatures? Yes. Thank you. A pause. Kai. Her voice had shifted, a little quieter, a little more specific. "Why are you going down?" "Not because it's the only way to get stronger, I know that. Why do you want to get stronger?" A long silence. Kai looked at the walls of the second base, at the magnetite veins, at her neat notes in the notebook. "They threw me out," he said at last. "Not because I was dangerous, not because I did something wrong. They threw me out because the system couldn't classify me. And the system decided that unclassifiable meant non-existent." "And you want to prove you exist?" "No," he said. I want to return. Simply to return. And for that, I need to become someone who can't be stopped at New Acre's gates.
Strong enough that the system won't dare say no.
Comprehensible enough that the system can't say unclassifiable. He paused. I want them to look at me again, and this time find something. Not zero, not archive gray, something real. Erna looked at him for a long time.
What exactly do you consider
real? 21 deaths and 21 blueprints, said Kai. That's real enough. Chapter 5. What Gets Built in the Dark. A month in the abyss had weight. Not abstract weight, physical. Kai felt it in every movement, in the way he automatically assessed load on the floor beneath his feet, in the way his peripheral vision constantly tracked thermal signatures in the dark, in the way terrain map worked continuously, flagging unstable sections. He'd become a different person. Not better in any general human sense, simply different. Adapted, like a living creature that had spent too long in a specific environment. The count at the end of the first month? 34 deaths, 34 revivals, 34 blueprints. Updates Report, Month 1. Host, Kai Morn. Classification, Archival Class / Death Copier. Death count, 34. Active abilities. Death Anatomy. Sees critical vulnerable points on creatures from which the host has previously died. Active Thermal Camouflage Countermeasure. Temporary Zero Heat Signature, up to 40 seconds. Passive Adaptations. Primary. Reaction Speed, plus 34% over baseline human. Slashing Damage Resistance, plus 12%. Bone Density, plus 18%, including significant occipital reinforcement. Pain Threshold, elevated to allow function under trauma incompatible with standard human pain tolerance. Full immunity to broodmother worker neurotoxin. Immunity to colonial secretion class acid, 93%. Resistance to necrotizing agents, 55%. Chemical damage resistance, 41%. Heat damage resistance, 38%. Skin regeneration, active, passive. Muscle fiber enhancement, plus 27% physical strength. Passive sensory abilities. Strike read. Contact point marker 0.3 seconds before opponent's attack. Terrain map. Flags unstable surface sections within 5 meters. Seismic hearing. Stone vibrations within 15 meters. Poison map. Visibility of toxic airborne substances as blue glow. Colony map. Sense positions of worker. Organisms within 20 meters. Chemical analysis. Determines composition of substances on visual contact. Tactile field perception. Living creatures within 8 meters via air vibration. Thermal vision. Heat signatures within 20 meters. Echo shadow. Invisible creatures via thermal trace within 10 meters. Structural reading. Instinctive assessment of load on body. Infrastructure. Base Point 1, Tier 1, 12 by 8 meters, fortified, equipped. Base Point 2, Tier 2, 20 by 15 meters plus alcove, magnetite shield against magical detection. System note. Host has demonstrated a non-standard approach to blueprint accumulation. Standard model. Random deaths, chaotic adaptation. Observed model. Systematic study of threats before lethal contact, subsequent analysis, infrastructure construction to support safe revivals. Projection. The host is not simply adapting to the abyss. The host is methodically building it out. This is non-standard. This is interesting. Recommendation: continue observation. Kai read the last 3 lines of the system note twice, then thought, the system is watching. He hadn't thought about this before, about the fact that the system wasn't just issuing blueprints, but accumulating data about him as well. It was symmetrical. He was studying the abyss through deaths. The system was studying him through revivals. Fine, let it watch. He had nothing to hide from the system, only from Newacre and its rank hierarchy. And the system, by its own note, was, if not an ally, then at least something neutral. It wasn't trying to stop him, it was observing. He stood and stepped out of the alcove where he'd been reviewing the report. Point 2 was working. Erna had given them not just a fortified chamber, she'd given them a laboratory. A table with tools sorted by size and purpose, a stone shelf with specimens, carapaces, tissue fragments, minerals collected from the tunnels. Her notebooks, there were 4 now, with detailed notes on every creature studied, every wall structure, every anomaly of Tier 2. Kai looked at the shelf, then at the map he'd been drawing on the wall in charcoal. Charcoal from the burned-out remnants of spent light crystals. The map had both tiers marked, as far as they'd explored. Bases, routes, danger zones, resource points. Then he looked at Erna, sitting against the far wall, working with a piece of magnetite ore. Erna. Yes? How long would you need to reinforce the 3rd passage? She didn't ask which 3rd passage. They both knew. The Tier 3 transition was 500 meters to the east. Something guarded it that Kai knew very little about. The Shades communicated about it through gesture and deliberately avoided that area. That was a bad sign, when Tier 2 creatures gave something a wide berth. Depends on what's there, said Erna. If the passage structure is like this one, a week. If not, I don't know. We need to look first. Yes. I'll go look today. You'll go die today. Also an option? Erna set down the ore. Kai, 34 deaths in a month. Do you understand that this... She searched for the word. This is not what a survivor is supposed to look like. I'm not a survivor, he said. I'm a builder. I'm building understanding of the abyss from my deaths. That sounds fine, she said. But each death is 30 seconds while you don't revive. 30 seconds when you're dead, and I'm standing here not knowing if it's going to happen again. Kai stopped. He hadn't thought about this, about how it looked from the outside. He died and revived. For him, it was uncomfortable, but routine. For her, 30 seconds of uncertainty every time. The system hasn't failed, he said. Yet. Yet, he agreed. But if it fails, then nothing can be changed about it anyway. That's not comforting. I know. Silence. Let's go to the 3rd passage together, she said at last. Look, then decide. The 3rd passage turned out not to be a tunnel. It was a hole, a vertical shaft roughly 4 meters in diameter, dropping straight down. Walls, smooth, almost polished, as if something very large had passed through them many times. Thermal vision showed faint heat from below, not from creatures, from the walls themselves. The stone was warm. The Shades avoided the shaft in a wide arc. Kai could see their heat signatures in the surrounding tunnels. They existed nearby, but didn't approach this spot. What is it? Erna asked quietly. I don't know. Kai leaned over the edge. Echo Shadow was silent. No invisible creatures nearby. Tactile field perception was silent too, but seismic hearing picked up something from below. Very slow, very deep vibrations, like something enormous below was breathing. "We shouldn't go down there," said Erna. "We need to go down there," Kai corrected. "Kai, if you fall in there and die, you'll revive at the point of death, which is inside a vertical shaft of unknown depth." He hadn't thought about that. He thought about it now. "Right," he said. "We need a descent, not a fall, a controlled descent." "We don't have rope." "We have 3 pairs of hands, a builder class, and 2 tiers of raw materials," he said. "Give me a week." Erna looked at the shaft, then at him. A week. The following 7 days were the most intensive construction period Kai could imagine without specialized equipment. They needed rope, strong enough to hold his weight during descent into unknown depth. There were enough biological materials, tendons from Tier 2 creatures, fibers of particular fungi, stone troll hide. Erna worked with them continuously, weaving in structural reinforcement through her class. Simultaneously, Kai studied the shaft. Every day he spent several hours at its edge, using every sensory ability he had. By the 3rd day, the picture had become somewhat clearer. Depth? Unknown. But seismic hearing vibrations gave a rough estimate: 70 to 100 meters. Walls? Smooth, but not slippery. Tiny cracks in them, enough for fingers. He could descend using the walls as support. Heat from below, increased with depth. Chemical analysis showed a changing air composition, more magical agents, several unfamiliar compounds. And, most importantly, death anatomy was catching something from below. Faintly, barely, as if the system saw a vulnerable point of something so vast that most of it was outside the ability's range. Something alive was down there. Something very large and very old. On the 4th day, Kai fell into the shaft intentionally. Not all the way. He stopped himself by catching a wall outcrop after 20 meters. That was painful in itself, but it gave him something valuable: a temperature profile at various depths, air composition at the 20-meter mark, and confirmation that the walls held weight. He climbed back up and logged the data. On the 6th day, the rope was ready. Erna had stress-tested it at 3 times load capacity. Kai created a simple anchor point at the shaft edge, a magnetite ore outcrop, structurally reinforced by Erna to strength he mentally classified as should hold. The system added a note on its own without prompting. System note: host is preparing for first contact with a Tier 3 entity. Current adaptation level: sufficient for Tier 1, conditionally sufficient for Tier 2, insufficient for Tier 3. Projection: high probability of lethal outcome on first contact. This is not grounds for refusing the descent. This is grounds for careful preparation. The host presumably understands this. On the 7th day, Kai and Erna stood at the shaft's edge. The rope, 30 meters, with knots every meter for grip. Anchor point tested 3 times. He had the spear. 2nd generation, stronger, longer, with an additional point. A light crystal. His full 3-day ration supply. "I'm going alone," said Kai. "No." Erna was checking the knots on the rope. "I'm going with you." "You can't die and revive." "You can't build in the dark alone." "Erna." "Kai." She looked up. "You've built a survival system out of your deaths. I respect that." But I spent 2 months in the abyss without any deaths, through caution, observation, and environmental understanding. A pause. We both survived the abyss in our own ways. My way goes the same direction as yours. A long silence. You understand what might happen? I understand that I don't understand what might happen. She tied the last knot. That's the standard situation. Kai looked at her. All right, he said at last. They began the descent. At 30 meters depth, the air changed. Not deteriorated, changed. It became denser, as if saturated with something absent above. Chemical analysis produced a long list of components, most unfamiliar. One of them the system flagged specifically. Concentrated magical agent, class primordial, origin pre-shaft era. Pre-shaft era. The grand shaft, the ranking and evaluation system that determined every person's place in the world, had been created roughly 300 years ago. Before it, the world operated by different rules. Which ones exactly? The official documents were silent on this. Something from that time was here, below. At 50 meters depth, Death Anatomy began operating at full capacity. A glowing marker, enormous, occupying nearly the entire field of inner vision, pointed downward. Not at a specific point, at something that was everywhere below simultaneously. Do you see anything? Erna asked quietly. A marker, said Kai. Through Death Anatomy. Big. How big? Very. At 70 meters depth, the rope ran out. Their feet found stone. Kai slowly illuminated the space around them. They were in a large cavity, considerably larger than any chamber on either tier. The ceiling rose some 20 meters above them. The floor, level, as if polished, warm. The walls receded into darkness on both sides. In the center of the cavity was something. Kai directed the light crystal toward it. The creature was large, not in the sense of a large animal, but in the sense of an architectural element that turned out to be alive. It occupied the central portion of the cavity, spread across the floor, with something like wings folded along its body. Dark blue, almost black. Breathing slowly, Kai counted roughly 1 breath per minute. Death Anatomy showed the marker directly in the center. Not a vulnerable point. He understood the difference only now. Not the place to strike. This was a different marker. The system displayed it differently. Not the red pulsing light of critical points on creatures he died from. This marker was white, even, calm. This is not something to kill, Kai thought. This is something to understand. The creature opened its eyes, one eye on each side of its body. Enormous, occupying a significant portion of the head. Irises, not black, not blue, something between, shifting as he watched. It looked at him, then at Erna, then at him again. And then, without sound, without movement, simply like text appearing in his mind, something arrived. Not words, not images, something more direct. Knowledge deposited directly into memory, as if someone had opened a drawer in his head and placed information there without asking permission. He knew now what this creature called itself, in a language with no written form and no sounds, because the creature used neither. No translation existed. The closest equivalent Kai could find in his own memory? The one who was before the separation. He knew that this creature had been here before the abyss, before the grand shaft, before the rank system. Before the city of New Acre and all the cities before it. He knew it had not been alone, once, and that the others had gone so long ago that even the concept of long ago seemed insufficient. He knew that it saw each of his deaths and each of his revivals, that it had been watching him since the moment he fell into the abyss, that he was the first human to descend into this cavity by choice rather than by accident. And he knew, the last thing, the most important, that it had been waiting. For what? Kai asked. Not aloud. The same way the creatures spoke to him, directly, without sound. The answer didn't come immediately. The creature closed its eyes for a moment, then opened them again. And Kai received knowledge of the fact that the Grand Shaft system, all its architecture of ranks and classes, all its power over people, all its order, had been built on a foundation that was taken without permission, cut from something older, from a system that existed before and which did not call people by ranks but by what they actually were. The Grand Shaft had stolen a principle from something that had been here before it and distorted it, because those who built the shaft didn't understand what they were taking. Kai stood in the cavity and processed this knowledge, then thought about the ceremony, about the ashen light above the column, about Vort Aussen's words, 2 survivors in 180 years, about the nullifying bracelet on his wrist, about the fact that the Protocol 9 system, the drop into the abyss, wasn't simply punishment. It was isolation, so that those whom the Grand Shaft couldn't classify couldn't find what existed before it. Not all of them died in the first hours from chance creatures. Some made it here and found this. Kai, Erna said quietly. He turned. She was standing at the wall, beside the rope's anchor point, watching the creature with the professional attention he knew from her. Are you talking to it? She asked. It's talking to me. What is it saying? Kai was quiet for a moment. That the Grand Shaft stole its architecture from something older, he said at last, and that something is still here. A long silence. What does that mean for us? She asked. I don't know yet. Kai watched the creature, which had closed its eyes again. But I think it changes the question. Which question? How do I get back to New Acre? A pause. That question gets smaller. And the bigger question? Kai looked at the creature, at the 34 death blueprints embedded in his body, at the 2 bases behind him, built from nothing in a place where nothing was supposed to be built, at Erna with her notebooks and her builder class. The bigger question, he said, isn't how do I return? It's what do I bring with me when I do? The creature didn't open its eyes, but Kai felt, through something that had no name, that it was listening, and that it was waiting for an answer. That night, the first night in the Tier 3 cavity, Kai didn't sleep. Erna slept. She'd learned to sleep anywhere she felt safe, and the creature evidently didn't trouble her. Kai sat against the wall and thought. 34 deaths, 34 blueprints, a body that knew how to survive where it wasn't supposed to. 2 bases that had turned the abyss from a killing field into a place where you could work methodically. And now, knowledge that the system that had thrown him here was built on a stolen foundation. He thought about what this meant practically. The Grand Shaft evaluated people against a scale it had defined itself. Ranks, classes, abilities, all of these were categories the Shaft had created to order the world for its own purposes. Some it saw, some it didn't. Those it didn't see, it called zero and discarded. But the scale was arbitrary. The Shaft wasn't measuring something real. It was measuring conformity to its own categories. Kai wasn't zero because there was nothing in him. He was zero because there was something in him for which the Shaft had no number. That wasn't his problem. That was the system's problem. And a system that cannot measure what genuinely exists will, sooner or later, encounter what exists without its permission. He raised his hand and looked at it in the faint light of a fading crystal. Skin grown back from acid burns, 3 shades lighter than the skin around it. Bones whose density he could feel, density no ordinary human had. Reflexes that fired before thought could complete a sentence. 34 deaths, and he lived. Not because he was strong, because each death made the next death slightly less lethal. Because he was building, not only from stone and mineral, but from the experience of dying itself. He thought about what would happen when he returned. If he returned. No, when. He'd made that decision at the bottom of the drop shaft, when he'd revived for the first time and read the first system note. He would return. The only question was, who exactly? Not someone the shaft would have to acknowledge by rank, someone it couldn't call zero again. Someone with enough knowledge about the abyss, about the system, about what existed before the system, to make Archive Gray the color not of a sentence, but of something else. What exactly? He didn't know yet. But he was going to find out. Every day, every death, every blueprint, every fortified wall, every carved tunnel, every mapped route. Down, then up. At dawn, he sensed it through the change in air temperature. Dawn made itself known even on Tier 3, if you knew where to listen. He woke Erna. "I want to talk about a third base." She opened her eyes. Not groggy, the builder class apparently enabled fast waking. "Here?" "Here." She looked at the cavity, at the creature, motionless in the center. "Will it allow it?" "I think that's exactly why it's here." A long pause. "What do you want to build?" Kai looked at the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the magnetite veins visible even here if you looked carefully. "Something that will stand," he said, "for a long time." Erna got out her notebook. "Then tell me." Status report. End of Book 1. Host, Kai Morn. Classification, Archival. Class/Death Copier. Death count, 34. Revival count, 34. Infrastructure, Base, Point 1. Tier 1, active. Base, Point 2. Tier 2, active. Magnetite shield. Base, Point 3. Tier 3, in design. Allies, Erna Vecht, builder class. Status, active. Knowledge about the system. The Grand Shaft was built on principles taken from pre-shaft era architecture without understanding their nature. The original source, active, located in Tier 3. Current objective, study of Tier 3, construction of Point 3, continued blueprint accumulation. Long-term objective, return to New Acre. Not for recognition, not for revenge. To demonstrate that a system of zeros does not exist. Only systems that cannot count. System note. Host continues to demonstrate non-standard pattern. The majority of archival hosts in the history of observations either died permanently, mechanism unknown, presumably core structure destruction through overload, or adapted to a specific tier and stopped descending. This host descends. This host builds. This host found the original source on Tier 3 faster than any previous bearer. Projection, impossible. Continue observation.